school year in collaboration with the Family Network of Disabilities and the Parent Education Network. Today we have our Penn County assigned representative, Miss Allie Walford, and she's going to be sharing with us the components of the IEP and the importance of you as a parent or guardian at the IEP table. So Allie, at this time, I am going to say that the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen immediately because our introduction is actually part of our workshop. I will also apologize ahead of time. No matter how many times we practice, you have to see how this beautifully neurodivergent brain works with my desktop. So let's get to the presentation. There we go. So today, Family Network on Disabilities calls it your guide to an IEP, an individualized education plan that works. So we want to thank everybody for being here. We know it is really important, and I love the lunch and learn. It doesn't work for all families, but I think it's a great opportunity. So if you need to eat or take a sip of your drink or even, step out and use the restroom, please feel free to do that. Like Ternisha said, this will be archived, which is really one of those silver linings of COVID. I personally have struggled finding any silver linings in COVID, but being able to have, really important information archived to view at other times, that can definitely be viewed as a silver lining. So Family Network on Disabilities is our parent organization. They have been around since 1985. They started out in 1985 in somebody's living room. And it was just a group of parents that had children with disabilities that they needed each other's support. They just IDEA was only 10 years old. That public law, five numbers that we always forget what it was called in the 70s. And they supported each other. And we have kept that peer model and that family driven model ever since then. We are the Parent Education Network. And what's important to know about that is we are what they call a nonprofit, a 501(c), and we get all of our funding exclusively from the Federal Department of Education. So for some of you, you may have been doing this for a long time and you know all of this information. For some of you, you may be brand new. You may have a baby that has just left early steps and they're going into ESC pre-K and you're just not really sure what to do. So I want to let you know that our meeting is kind of in the middle of that somewhere. And Jill and Tarnisha, and I believe it was Elizabeth, they're going to monitor that chat and they're going to make me aware of any questions that you might have. Um, Systemically, remember, we're going to keep those individual issues and those individual schools private and let the Orange County team help you. But what Penn does primarily is provide information, resources, and support. So our role is not an advocate. We're not going to go into those IEP meetings and provide advocacy. But we are going to do is we are going to provide that lived experience. Everyone from our CEO right down to that 8-hour front office desk person, we all have a child with a disability or ourselves lives with a disability. I have the blessing of being both, twice exceptional, they say. I live with my own mental health challenges and diagnoses, which I often and very regularly freely share. I think it helps to reduce stigma. And my son had an IEP from first grade through his graduation in 2018. He's now 21 and in college. So we use our stories, we use our lived experience to talk about that. Saying all of that, I am not an attorney. I am not a doctor. I am not a mental health professional. I am not going to practice any of those things without a license. I am going to share my lived experience and the wonderful training that I have had from our Department of Education, from our technical assistance centers, and I'm going to share, that information from you. So we have to start out with our foundation, right? The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We often use the term special education also, and a lot of people don't like that term. We understand that. There's a concept called person first language, or individual person language. Um, you know, we're just going to respect what the individual wants. But for what you guys need to know is that special education or special needs is what is used by the federal government, and that's why we use that language and that information. So this is the federal statute. We have a whole entire 6-part workshop just on IDEA alone and the pillars of IDEA. We are not going to talk about that today. Today, we are only going to talk about the IEP, the Individualized Education Plan. That's just one part of IDEA. We do want to let you know that there are 6 principles in IDEA. And again, like I said at the earlier beginning of the meeting, there may be some veterans in the room, and we very much are grateful that you are here, and we appreciate that you're here. But for those beginners, we think it's important to review some of the foundation. So some of those acronyms that you might hear is FAPE, free and appropriate public education. That is definitely one of the principles in IDEA. We've already talked about IEP. We're going to dig into that in just a few minutes. Um, Appropriate evaluations. It is very, very essential that your child have the appropriate evaluation done at the beginning of their journey when they're getting ready to get evaluated. If your child, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that just yet. If your child lives with a mental health diagnosis like my child does, but he really does not struggle in that area of specific learning disability, which is highly unusual because individuals that live with mental health diagnoses, they often really struggle with specific learning disabilities. But if that's not their issue, then we would want to make sure that we do that appropriate evaluation. LRE, another acronym, right? Least restrictive environment. Um, what you need to know about that is Florida has a benchmark. The Department of Education for Florida, and I forget if they have increased it already, but it used to be that they wanted at least 80% of all of their individuals that had IEPs in a general education classroom for 80% of the day. And that can be really hard, especially if those classrooms don't have the appropriate supports, but it's an important component and principle of IDEA, and that number may have even been raised to 85. I apologize that I don't recall off the top of my head. Parent and student participation, absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. You may have 12 other people at that IEP table with you, and just you might be there alone, or it might just be you and a friend, or you and your partner. You are 50% of that meeting. And now, now as of July 1st, 2021, when your teenager turns 12, they will get invited to that table also. And your procedural safeguards. Nobody likes to read procedural safeguards. They think that they are very dry, but the procedural safeguards are very important. That is your individual rights and what are afforded and what is expected of you in IDEA. So the procedural safeguards are given out at every single meeting. On our website on an FND, we have a resource section, and in our resource section, there's part of it that's called the downloadable special education resources. We have a whole section on procedural safeguards alone. That's how important it is. You can also access that document from the federal department, not the federal, I'm sorry, from the Florida Department of Education, as well as the district. I'm sure your parent liaison and your outreach district folks there would have that. What I was sharing was, as parents of children with disabilities, we know resilience better than anybody else. So not only do we have a plan A, B, C, and D, but we could go to the end of the alphabet. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and we'll just take off where we left off. And thank you everybody for your patience. Going to apologize again for the ADHD of my screen. Can everybody see my screen okay with the IEP team?
Yes, thank you.
I hear that you hear me. All right. Let's all use our SEL skills and take a deep cleansing breath and continue. Who's in the meeting of this circle? Our student is in the meeting of this middle of this circle, right? So for our babies that are ESE 3 and they're just transitioning from early steps, we may not want them at a meeting. That may not be appropriate. But according to new law that has just changed in January of this year, transition will start at 12 now. And what has been really frustrating for some of the districts is the rules haven't even been written yet. So the legislators wrote the law, but the rules haven't been written. So our districts are working very closely on how to have those appropriate transition meetings. But every IEP meeting has a certain amount of people at it. So you're going to have the student, you're going to have the parent. The parent is allowed to have anyone that they want to have at the meeting. Some people love having their mother at the meeting. I would never have my mother at the meeting. That would not bring me peace. That would not be helpful for me. Um, and I did not utilize advocates. In 11 years of having an IEP, I only had an advocate twice, and that was during his high school years, and we really needed it at that time. Um, um, but you do have that right to have someone. I don't know the specifics of it, but if you do have an attorney, I believe you have the right to let the district know that you're going to bring an attorney, and that adds a whole nother layer of everything. If it is a traditional IEP meeting, you're going to have your LEA or that local education authority. Often that's your ESE specialist or staffing specialist or case manager. PENN works with 12 counties, so I'm not exactly sure what Orange County calls that person. You will have at least one general education teacher. When we got into high school and middle school, I did make that request if he was struggling in more than one of his general education classes, if they could find the opportunity for maybe those two people to, rotate out. You will also have your ESE teacher, and you will have anybody who is providing supplemental services to that student. So whether it is the speech language pathologist or the OT or the PT or the alphabet soup of people that are helping your student as is written in the IEP by the team. If you are in a brand new meeting, you will have the evaluator. You'll have the persons that wrote the evaluation that's going to determine the eligibility of your child. We just put this screen visual in just to touch on for a moment. I think many of you have seen this before. This is the triangle of RTI and MTSS, the response to intervention, and the multi-tiered systems of support. This is a general education tool. However, some of our students with disabilities do benefit from it. Tier 1 is obviously the bottom, which is the widest, and that is all of our students. When some of our students need additional interventions, but they are not in that IEP process, they will receive those interventions independently or a small group or what it looks like individually in that school and in that classroom. And then the smallest amount would be those few. If all of those interventions are not working, and that maybe it might be time for the team to start thinking about uh, an evaluation for an IEP, and that can come anywhere. That can come from the parent, that can come from the classroom teacher, it can come from the interventionist. But you do need to sign that consent to evaluate, and that's what our wheel is here. If you take a quick peek at this, you'll see that we have the pre-referral and the referral. So your pre-referral could be like when your child is experiencing the RTI and they're gathering that data and they're trying to determine, is an eligibility going to be necessary. Then you have that formal referral where you sign that consent to evaluation and those 60 days start. After the team has the district has had the opportunity to run that evaluation, then we identify what we're going to look at. What are they going to be um, evaluating? What are they going to look at? Remember, we had talked about earlier with appropriate evaluations. Then you have your eligibility meeting. So this is something that I've found that my parents have a really hard time digesting. Just because your child has a medical diagnosis does not automatically mean they're going to have an educational eligibility. Very important distinction to know. Really good personal example. My son and my best friend, her son, they're 3 months apart. Zach absolutely met the criteria and needed the eligibility of ED for his IEP. Her son had autism. It was low need. I don't like using the word high functioning, low functioning. Um, so for those of you that are used to those terms, he was a very high functioning individual. He was in, the IB programs and et cetera, but he was a low need individual to the point of he never had an IEP. They did not disclose. They worked individually with the teachers, and IEP was not developed. So if you're looking at that number 4, I just want to reiterate that the eligibility and the medical diagnosis are two completely different things. When your student is found eligible, and there is a section on the Florida Department of Education page, Bs, they've changed their Bs. It's now BESE instead of BEESE. There is a section in there that very specifically lays out what the criteria is of those eligibilities. For those parents that are new, I think that's important information that you have. Now, the part we've all been waiting for, right, is the IEP development. That's that group of people that I told you about that each IEP is required to have at their table. And as a team, you are developing that IEP. We're going to talk about that. The implementation, is it being executed? And then the evaluation and review. As you may know, the IEP is held at a minimum of at least once a year. If there are some situations where a parent-teacher conference cannot resolve the issue, or if your district does case conferences, I don't know that off the top of my head. Like I said, Penn serves 12 counties. Um, if you cannot resolve those issues, then an interim IEP can be requested, and you can pull the whole team together um, and talk about the changes that may be needed as a group. So what are the pieces of the IEP? There are 8 pieces of an IEP. It's your present level of performance, your measurable goals, that progressive explanation, which many people know as PLOP, present levels of performance, or PLP. Again, each district does it differently. That description of services, placement, you may also know that as LRE. accommodations and modifications. As we know, modifications are for those students that are utilizing the access points pathway to graduation. The amount and duration, that is a very important part of your IEP. How long is that intervention being administered to your child? How often is that intervention being provided, and who is providing it? And then, like I said, just changed this year, brand new. I believe, Tarnisha, you said Project 10 is coming soon to talk about that House Bill 173.
Yes, next month in October, we will have Project 10 that will go into detail more in regards to the changes of that, and then just some other transition basics. So that will be held on October 13th for parents that are interested, and we'll be posting that actual event to our Facebook page as well as our website shortly after this event today. Thank you for
It,
having
I,
me.
Yeah, and you are not going to want to miss that one. You're not going to miss that one. And I will share with you, we work with all of the discretionary projects. I'm going to take a quick pause before I talk about present levels of performance. One of the positive things of the Family Network on Disability housing all three of the parent training information centers that Florida has is from Key West to Pensacola, we have a relationship with all 67 school districts. We have a relationship with Tallahassee, and we have a relationship with what's called those discretionary projects. So whether it is early steps or it is SEDNet, which works with our emotional behavioral, or I don't want to leave anybody out. Project 10, Fiddlers, Finn. We work with all of them. So Franklin, who I believe is going to be giving your presentation next month, is a absolutely dynamic speaker. And Project 10 helped us develop the parent version of that training. So we do have a very active Facebook page, and we will be having it. And it's called the Pathways of Graduation. And we probably won't release that until November, but we do have that also. So back to the IEP, our present levels of performance. It's not on here, but I have worked very closely with our communication department to put it on here, and that is our parent input. Our parent input is so important, you guys. Um, it it gives your view of your child to that team that is working with your child. And one of the lessons I learned, and I really wish I would have learned it a lot sooner, is it being strength based. What are those things that your child is capable of? What are those strengths that your child exercises? What are those likes and those hobbies? Of course, we want to look at those areas of need, or our old world language deficiencies. But when my guy was in first grade, like I said, very high need individual, EBD eligibility, there were room clears. That's scary for the other children. That's scary for my child. Um, there was physical violence. He threw desks, he hit teachers, and I would talk about all of those negative things. And finally, in about third grade, I said, "Oh my gosh, I wouldn't want this kid either. He sounds just horrible. And I've got 26 other kids to deal with." So I started changing his parent input a little bit to he really needs a lot of help with transition. If you give him a heads up about when things are going to change, whether it's a visual or not visual, he works a lot better that way. Even though he's in third grade, I'm sorry, allergies, he loves Pokemon. And I provided a deck of Pokemon cards to the teacher to use now, as I know, as a reinforcer. But we did not live with autism, so I didn't have those words. Um, there are these domains in the IEP, these present levels of performance, and you can read the screen as I can. It's the curriculum and learning environment, the social emotional, the independent functioning, the healthcare, and the communication. Domain D and domain E, They're really easy. Healthcare is for our individuals that have those medical concerns that are going to require some medical support. We do have some individuals that are able to be in the general education environment, but perhaps they live with a seizure disorder and they may need to have that medical nurse on hand to help support them. It wouldn't be appropriate for them to be in a self-contained classroom or school because cognitively they're right up there with their classmates, right? And then the domain E, the communication, that's primarily going to come from our speech language pathologist. And I was just in a meeting recently, and I believe, I'm so sorry, allergies. I believe the number's about 12%. I think SLD, that specific language disability, is the highest category of need for our individuals in Florida that live with disabilities. Um, what you are going to see in these present levels of performance is the data. So parents, I don't want you to be scared of that data. Data might be new to you, but that's what's going to drive the goals, and that's what's going to help provide those interventions that your child needs so we can lessen that gap as much as possible. So Tarnisha, Elizabeth, Jill, I only see the four of you. Do we have any questions or anything at this time that people would like to bring up? Because I'm an in-person speaker. I like the head nods. I like the visual. I like the feedback. I need positive reinforcement as much as the next guy. I want to just take a quiz pause before we jump into those smart measurable goals. If there's any systemic generalized questions that we can answer for anybody.
As far as the chat goes, we did have one, but it was specific to their child, so they did use the link. Thank you for doing that. And like I said, we'll get back to those with direct responses. I just wanted to piggyback off of what you were saying with the parent input because it's so important. And I'll just have a moment of transparency. I also have a little one with a disability, but he also has things on the healthcare side that do not impact him cognitively. So I did find that there was this disconnect of sharing the academic concerns where they still needed to know of those health concerns in case at some point they did start to impact them. But they were kind of working on totally separate pages where the clinic had this health plan in place, but the other side, the academic side of things, didn't have that information without my input as a parent. So there were times where things kind of revved up and we had to look at some of the health needs and how that might be impacting him cognitively. But without that very important input from myself as his parent, the school would have had no idea to even try to connect or look at the two and how they intertwine. So your input as a parent, I mean, you know your child better than anyone else. I know mine. Lord knows better than anyone else. But that's key. So any pertinent information that you have, the IEP travels with your student or with your child. My little one just started first grade and he has a new teacher who is learning him and he is learning her. But by having that input from myself as well as his other teachers, we were able to skip a lot of the difficulty that he had when he started kindergarten, where they were kind of guessing, like, hey, what's going to work, what's not going to work. Whereas I was able to share right off the bat some of the things that would be beneficial for them to try or implement from day one, as opposed to, again, them figuring it out. And I'm telling you, you don't want to have to figure it out with my little love. He's so sweet when you give him the support that he needs, but he does struggle when he doesn't have that. So that input from parents is so key and so important every single year.
It really is, and as I've shared multiple times, PENN supports 12 different counties, from Key West all the way up to Lake County, just about above you guys, over to Polk County, just to the west of you. So I have the four largest school districts of the state, and three or four of those largest districts are of the largest in the entire country. So that's a lot of students. That's a lot of people. Um, but for my benefit, it's a lot of information. I get to do a lot of workshops like this and bring forward the best. So a really good example, if your baby experienced a lot of ear infections as a child, um, that may have messed with their ability to read and you may need to let that teacher know, hey, you got to talk to her right ear. We're still working with that ENT to bring that left ear up to full gear, but you need to be looking at her, and you need to look at talking that right ear. Um, our individuals that live with ADHD, a lot of times that'll fall under the OHI category, that other health impaired. Guess what, guys? There's two types of ADHD. There's the ADHD that my kid had that caused the room clear, along with all the other bit of alphabet soup that was behind his name. And then there's the inattentive type. So it's really important for that individual to use that accommodation of repeat, clarify, summarize. So that individual, that student, has truly understood. And a real great learning experience I had recently was a presentation that I had done with the Epilepsy Foundation, and that not all epilepsies are a grand mal seizure where that individual is on the ground and you're just keeping them safe. It looks inattentive. So there's a lot to it. And what I didn't share with you is we support families from ability. So that is a lot of information that we're responsible for sharing with families. So we've only got about 25 minutes left. I'm going to get back to our workshop, but I think we're about halfway through the slides. I think by now, just about everybody has heard about SMART goals, right? And there's a different word for each one. You know, if you just Google SMART goals, you're going to see some kind of iteration of the specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely. My main information, because this is triage. This is a brief overview. We have much more in-depth workshops. We invite you to come to the PENN page. We'd like to come back to you guys another time, but I understand you have a lot of agencies that are going to support you. Um, but the one thing I want you to take away from this, and this was again a personal living lesson, um, Z, that's my child. Uh, Z will start his work within 3 minutes and complete it in the allotted time, 8 out of 10 times, as measured by teacher observation. I can't do a goal off the top of my head. If I were in a live audience, I would ask you, what's wrong with that goal? That's not a good goal. It's not a specific goal because it's measuring two different things. It's measuring that he has started the task, and it is also measured that he is completing the task. So that is something that, again, I didn't learn until much later on. And I didn't learn the EduSpeak until much later on. Soren, if you could put in our flyer that we have that is the ABCs of education that has all those acronyms in there, that would be really grateful. The explanation of progress, we already talked about this a little bit. This is what goes into those domains. This is where either the classroom teacher or the general education teacher or the specific therapist or um, a counselor that may be working with your child, that's where they place that data, and that's where they place where your child is working exactly right at that moment. If you do find yourself having pretty much the exact same goals every year, there is a little bit of a problem that you need to talk about with your team. That description of services, that tends to come towards the end of the IEP. And typically there is a page just for accommodations. Um, Even if you are using a program that is a drop down program of accommodations, IDEA was written before there were computers. 1975. We had some computers, but they were big as a room, right, Jill? They were huge. Um, if you have accommodation that is not in that drop down menu, it can be written in. Obviously, proximity to teacher. is one that's often used. What I share with families is that doesn't necessarily mean the closest desk to a teacher. If you have a student that really struggles with anxiety, maybe they need to be midway back or all the way back. I know a lot of our schools don't have windows, but some do. Maybe they need to not be near a window, but that proximity to teacher is an individualized discussion and an it's example of an accommodation. That specialized instruction. That brings us back to, which I believe is my next slide. Nope, but the who, what, when, where, and why. Who is providing what? How often are they providing? What are they providing? What intervention are they providing? Um, and that is a really important part of the IEP, and that is driven by your present levels of performance, which drives your goals. Very quickly, I will talk about that continuum of least restrictive environment. I'm actually doing an event next Thursday with a PTSA from a different county that I'm very excited about, where we will be talking about inclusion and ableism. And so ableism is just a huge topic that is just really not talked about this day, but it fits in with inclusion. And so a little bit of the research that I was having is IDEA is silent on inclusion. IDEA does not have any specific language about inclusion, but it does have very specific language about the least restrictive environment. And then, of course, there was that I'm not practicing law without a license. I'm just sharing the name of a case. But there was the Andrew F. case that recently happened about high expectations. So you start out fully included, and then that's your general education classroom, and then you can either have a pull out or um, a pull out or a push in. It can be in like a resource room or a self-contained room. You can be in an entire school that is fifth grade, you're 5 years old through 22. Everybody, the team has agreed that is their need that they are at a specific center school. We also have hospital homebound and residential school, and it takes very specific criteria to meet those last two. I will just share with you on a very quick note that I experienced all of those. In kindergarten and first grade, our child was in gen ed. In first grade, we had something called a manifest determination. And that's when your child has 10 suspensions in 1 year. What does a first grader do? What does a first grader do that causes 10 suspensions in really 4 months? Because our determination meeting was in January. He did not have his FBA, his functional behavioral assessment plan. I didn't know about that at that time. But as a team, we agreed that he needed to go to that self-contained classroom. And he had a little bit of success there until third grade. But again, as a team, we agreed that he needed to go to a self-contained school. And in my area, we call it a center school. Well, that was absolutely terrifying. There were 22-year-old men on that campus with my third grade 8-year-old boy. Um, Best thing we could have ever done. Best thing we ever could have done. We had a fabulous principal, we had a fabulous teacher, we had a fabulous support facilitator, and halfway by fifth grade, he was back in gen ed. Now, I will share with you, I did have to fight for it. They did want him to wait until sixth grade to do that transition, and I said, no way. He is not missing the fifth grade kickball game. He is not missing the fifth grade trip. He is not missing the fifth grade graduation. He is not missing the fifth grade dance. So, you are 50% of your team. We already talked a little bit about accommodations and modifications. Those accommodations are the things that you can do that can level the playing field so that your child can join the I cans. maybe they need to do their math to mastery. So if the whole class has 20 problems assigned, if your child can show mastery at 10, and they either have ADHD or anxiety or something that really just blows them through the roof, that, oh my gosh, I have 20 problems I have to do and I'm never going to get it done. As a team, we'll discuss, is this something that we can do to mastery? There are just sites and sites and sites about accommodations. And again, modifications, and if you bear with me just a second, I actually have my own assistive technology here up next to me because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Um, it is an actual change in the curriculum. The modification is a change in the curriculum, and that is typically only offered to those students that are on access points. And in the state of Florida, it is the most significantly cognitively impaired student that should be on access points, and it is supposed to be less than 1% of the ESE population per county. Ooh, coming up for air. We talked about this one a couple of times too, but we think it's something that's important, is the amount and duration of your child's services. So let's pop back over to SLD world. Let's say that your child has that ever terrifying word that we think about, dyslexia, right? A lot of people don't know is dyslexia is actually written into IDEA. You cannot ask for a specific program, okay, parents, and I'm not even going to mention them, but you can ask for um, what works, a multisensory, evidence-based tactile intervention that is followed with fidelity. Did I talk that way in 2005? Miss Tarnisha, I did not talk that way in 2005. In 2005, I was a bookstore manager and I was recommending romance novels to old ladies, okay? But it is important that we learn the language that the school uses. So the amount and duration is very important. If the IEP team says, well, Jamal only needs 30 minutes once a week of reading instruction to close his gap, but Jamal's still making a D, or Johnny, could go either way, or Joelle, or Joanne. A name is a name is a name. I'm very much about inclusion and representing everybody. If the data shows that that 30 times once a week is not working, then you reconvene the team and you talk about it on an individualized basis. There are specialized factors that are included in IDEA that every team must consider. So, is behavior a manifestation of that child's disability? Is the disability contributing to the child's behavior? I will tell you that that is a very complicated area right now with uh, threat assessments that schools are required to proceed with, and a whole wide variety of topics that we're not going to touch on right now because it's just not appropriate. However, I will tell you, if the behavior is a direct manifestation of the disability, it is something that the team needs to look at. Obviously, blindness and visual impairment, something the team looks at. Deafness and hard of hearing. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of accommodations for that particular student. They may have an FM system that they use in their school. They may have their own cochlear implants that their parent have done on their own. Assistive technology needs. Well, here is another one of those silver linings of COVID. We're using WebEx right now. We have Zoom, we have Google, we have WebEx, we have Teams. The deaf and hard of hearing community has been using this for a very long time. And we, as the hearing community, are just catching up to them. So there can be I believe that assistive technology A lot of it has dropped down to tier 1 at many school districts. Your communication needs, and if you are an English language learner, it is very, very important for you to know that if English is not your first language and you do believe that you will really benefit from a translator at your annual IEP meeting, that can be requested from the school. It does need to be provided. You do need to give them enough time. Don't call the day before and say, hey, I need a Ukrainian translator for my meeting tomorrow. Not a joke. Really happened to me in another county that I serve. So just sharing that information with you.
I was going to jump in right there, Allie, and just share that if you really take a look at the meeting participation form that's sent home to parents prior to the IEP meeting, there is a spot to request that. Our department is actually planning to work specifically with our multilingual department to just ensure that even for like our workshops and things that go home, that we have that in multiple languages for families. So if at any point, even on the special education side of things, if there are language needs, we are working very closely with our multilingual department just to ensure that we've covered both bases. Whatever our families and our students need, we're here to provide that support. So feel free to reach out at any point if that is a concern. But on that meeting participation form or the meeting notice form, there is a spot to request a translator.
And I will tell you, it is it is very difficult for a school district to do that. And I'm not on anybody's side. I'm completely independent. I'm funded by the Federal Department of Education, but I do work for another major school district, and we are not allowed to work with them. I shouldn't say not allowed. It is strongly preferred that if we do not have a workshop in English, Spanish, and Creole, that we don't participate with them. So I am very lucky to have a parent who has an adult child with autism who speaks Haitian Creole. So if you do need someone who speaks Haitian Creole as a parent trainer, completely separate from the school district, we are happy to help that way. And we do have someone who speaks Spanish. We are currently looking for 2 more part-time positions. So I'll just put that plug in there right now. But at the moment, our team does speak all 3 major languages. And if we need an interpreter for another language, we'll make it happen. So an hour goes by so fast. We only have about 9 minutes left. Transition. Like I told you, be there or be square next week. Franklin is really one of the most dynamic speakers you will ever come across. He does talk a lot more about the school side of the house. So as soon as we release a date that we will be doing a Facebook Live specifically for the parents on the diploma pathways, I will share that with Jill and Tarnisha and Elizabeth to get out to whatever listserv you guys use. You'll see it all over social media. But transition specifically goes over your course of study. What are you doing? How are you doing it? What path are you taking to get your high school diploma? Are you using the waivers that are available? Are you doing 18 credits? Are you doing 24 credits? Are you using modifications? Like, again, we have a whole workshop on transition. What are your post-school outcomes? What are you doing towards those post-school outcomes? All right, parents, here's the real scary one. Even if you have a preschooler right now, 18 is before you know it. Before you even know it. My parent trainer Soren and I joke pretty regularly. Her son was born the day that, not the day exactly, but the year that my son attended his first transition meeting. And can I tell you, a 6'5", Caucasian and Jamaican EBD boy at an IEP meeting going, yeah, I don't want to be here. What are we doing? It it's just something we joke about to this day. But you do have to work with and prepare your child to be and to contribute to that meeting. And there's lots of ways to do it. If you happen to have a child that's nonverbal, you can do a video and you can share a video with the team or Google Slides or whatever digital platform you use, there's a lot of different ways that a child can contribute to the team. But if for whatever reason that child no longer wants you there at age 18, Miss Tarnisha has to gently ask you to leave. And it's just the law, and she's not doing it on purpose, or Miss Elizabeth, or Miss Jill, or whoever your ESC staffing specialist is. It just is what it is. And the whole point, everybody, of IDEA is for your child to have further employment, future education. I got that backwards. Further education, future employment, or independence as best as possible. Extended school year. I kind of feel like all 7 of these say the same thing, but extended school year in a non-COVID year. So let's be very, very clear about that, because the past 2 years have just been something that none of us have ever experienced before. And every county has called it something different, but my county called it lost summer learning opportunity. Um, Carnisha, can you still hear me? Everything went blank on me.
I can still hear you.
Okay, great. I'm so sorry. Everything went blank. It was a little terrifying for half a second. Um, ESY is part of the IEP, and it is not full time, and it is not every day. You do have to discuss it with your IEP team. And the main point that I want you to take away from this is if your child will experience regression from the skills that they have been working on all year long. That is really what this all comes down to in the very long of it. Very short, rather. It's a
Allie,
process. Yes,
I'm just
ma'am.
going to stop you and caution you. Our session will end in about 5 minutes. So I know we're almost to the end, but I just wanted to put that out there so that we don't all disappear on each other.
Oh, absolutely. So you know what? You can read the slides. I'm gonna go through them real quick. It's a process. The tips you need to succeed. It really is all about relationships, and it really does start with your classroom teacher. I went to every single parent teacher conference from kindergarten through graduation every quarter, and I went the fifth week of the quarter because that's after interim reports came out, and that's when we were able to help save the grades. What to bring in IEP? Bring yourself. Bring a send if you need to. Bring water. Sometimes you just need a break. Um, some people bring cookies if they have a good relationship. I want to put up our losing my words because I've been talking for an hour straight. Contact. I want to put up our contact page, and I think Soren will put either her email or my email in the chat box. There are many ways to get connected to us. We have at least 5 different Facebook pages, and one of those Facebook pages is exclusively in Spanish. In the downloadable resources that we never ever talk about enough, we have a sound bank. I find that the teachers like that sound bank. Um, and we are here for you. We do provide one-on-one support directly to a family. We do provide IEP clinics. We'll go over that IEP with you line by line so you'll be prepared to go into your meeting with your specialist and with your team and talk about your part. We're just not